board meeting for June 24th, 2019, the time being 7:03 p.m. Ms. Iker, will you please take roll call?
Mayor Christine Melendez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett.
Here.
Miles Baker.
Here.
Barry Wilson.
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer.
Here.
Tom Jones.
Here.
David Sosowski.
Here.
Mr. Rennemeyer, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In front of us, we have the agenda and the review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Baker approving the agenda as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. The agenda is approved unanimously as presented. Moving on to item 4 is a proclamation for the Community Cares event. Whereas the Community Cares Night serves to support and uplift members of the Windsor community and beyond, ultimately making our own little corner of the world more thoughtful, kind, and caring to all in our community without exception. Whereas the town of Windsor and partnering organizations seek to bring awareness to issues regarding mental health, bullying, suicide, addiction, mental and physical abuse, knowing that it happens in every community, even in our own. Whereas tragedy and violence are growing concerns throughout the United States, and the town of Windsor wants to stand as a bright star light that isn't above tragedy but acknowledges its existence. Whereas the town of Windsor is a community with a strong availability of resources, and by creating a Community Cares Night, the town proclaims that it will combine a fun way to learn about these resources in an effort to take a proactive role to educate our citizens. Whereas, by creating a Community Cares Night, the town of Windsor and various organizations can reach out to residents regardless of social or economic status, education, gender, origin, religious, belief, age, lifestyle, or abilities, and extend an opportunity for grace and acceptance. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Mayor Christine Melendez, proclaim Thursday, June 27th, 2019 as Community Cares Night, with encouragement for all citizens to care for others, not just on this day, but every day of the year. And with that, I hope that I will see each and every one of you at Community Cares Night, for it is truly an event and an opportunity for us all to hear and learn, to join in place with other resources and organizations, not just to care for our own, but most importantly, to be able to care for others when we come in contact or we see that need, that we have the opportunity and the tools needed to be able to reach out accordingly. And with that, we move on to item 5, which is an outside agency report. And this evening we're going to have a presentation from, I don't have,
Carrick.
Carrick.
Carrick?
Carrick Constable.
Okay, oh, okay.
Suicide prevention.
So, Carrick, would you like to come forward? State your name and address, and in the podium at the microphone, please. Come all the way to the microphone because everybody at home can't hear you unless you're in the microphone.
Hello, everyone. My name's Garrett Kessel. I live here in Windsor. Address?
Yes, please.
900 Clydesdale Lane, Windsor, Colorado.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Jacob Glover. My address is 937 Ventana Court.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Corey Wall, and my address is 1457 Hilltop Circle.
Okay. So please proceed.
Alrighty. So thank you everyone for coming out tonight.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
but
sorry.
I know you want to address them,
Yes.
but
They can hear you.
we need to capture
Okay,
you on the
perfect.
microphone
All right.
because we record these sessions, and I know, and your message is going to be very important, so we want to make sure everybody, not just those in the chamber, are able to hear you. So
Okay.
if you'll speak and look this way into the microphone, that will help us, okay?
Alrighty. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. So tonight we want to present to you our presentation for Project Citizen through the high school, which was a project we did through the school, and every class competed in groups of 4, and we went through competitions within the class to vote for the best topic, and surrounding the project was the idea to create the best solution for the best solution for a town or for a community, and coming up with a solution due to a problem within a community or the state or the country. And our group decided to do mental health for our project, and we were able to win our Project Citizen through our entire class for the semester, and this is why we're bringing it to you tonight, because we feel it's a very important topic to be addressed. So as I said, my name's Garrett Kessel.
My name's Corey Wall.
Jacob Glover.
And yeah, so we're going to be presenting our mental health presentation to you tonight.
Okay.
Do we need to speak into the mic for this too?
Yes.
Alrighty, so the concept of our project, as I was saying, is raising mental health awareness in our community. So, number one, why is this an issue within our community? So, first of all, an estimated 3.2 million adolescents aged 12 to 17 in the United States have had at least one major depressive episode. And this is over 13% of the population aged 12 to 17. And this count comes from the National Institute of Mental Health, so a credible source, and this is an incredibly high number as we thought. So another quick fact for you guys, suicide is the leading cause of death, unfortunately, for ages 10 to 24 in Colorado. And this was obviously a very shocking statistic from us coming from the Colorado Health Institute, because there's a lot of automobile accidents that are the main leading cause of death in many other states, whereas Colorado, it's suicide, which is very shocking. So some problem background nationally. It's led to a lot of school and family tragedies within our community, and 1 in 4 people will be affected by a mental or neurological issue at some point in their lives. So this is the only known diagnosis as well, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more people out there with mental health issues that haven't gone to a therapist or got a diagnosis from anyone. And as you see here, this is a map of the United States of suicide rates per 100,000 for each state. As you see, the dark red states show higher rates, and this is per 100,000 people, and the lighter states show lower rates. And does anyone have a guess as to why the states are the way they are and why many of these dark states reside in the same region?
Proximity to facilities.
Yes, that is correct. So, as you guys see, a lot of these states, such as Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, these are a lot of states that help isn't as readily available. A lot of help here is 3-4 hours away, versus California or New York. You're going to get help probably 15-20 minutes away. So the range to get help, people feel more hopeless because they don't want to take the time to get help when they could get help instantly in these other states. Also, another big reason for the states the way they are, there's a big stigma associated with these states, such as Montana, Wyoming. There's kind of this cowboy attitude and attitude that act like a man sort of attitude. And this stigma in these states relates to the suicide rates. So as you see these Western states, this culture has enveloped the people to believe that they can't share their mental issues, versus the East and West Coast, a lot of these people are a lot more welcome and sharing for their mental health issues. So, a little more problem background nationally and Colorado-wise. So, Colorado has been between the 5th and 10th highest for suicide rate in the nation for the last 20 years. And right now it's currently sitting at 20.3 per 100,000 kids. And this is 25% higher than the national average, which is 14. Weld County currently sits luckily below the Colorado average, but unfortunately above the national at 16.3. So in 2017, the southwest corner of Colorado had the highest rates. And like I said in the United States map, this also correlates with Colorado, the state itself. As you see here, this is a lot of area where help is less available. It takes longer to get places. And the mountains right here, it's going to be harder to find resources, hospitals, health institutes. And this is also why Colorado is higher on the scale. And this also comes from the Colorado Health Institute. So some more problem background directly through Colorado and Weld County. So this is where a lot of people are going to more relate to it and want to know the stats. So many parents are unaware about local resources. Many parents don't know about agencies and other organizations that can help their kids, help them. Also, there are many resources available, such as North Range Behavioral, Colorado Crisis Health Services, also below the surface, which is a text line. So 2007, approximately 87 suicides from ages 15 to 24, while in 2017, there was approximately 169 from ages 15 to 24. And as you see from the graph right there, which also comes from the Colorado Health Institute, it's doubled in 10 years. And the green is ages 15 to 24, which as you see has gone up too fast in the last 10 years. So some more problem background, a little extra information. We made this graph for you guys, and click over. So this graph comes from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and it relates to a survey they gave almost 50,000 kids statewide over certain feelings they had in mental health, feelings they had, and their state of mind. So 3 questions they asked the kids, which we put on this graph. Number 1, who felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 or more weeks or more weeks in a row that they stopped doing regular activities. The bar graph in the middle seriously considered attempting suicide, and bar graph on the right, they seriously planned their suicide. So as you see, the blue line pertains to 2013, while the red is 2015, and the yellow is 2017. And in each graph, you see it climbs every year in each question. And this is something we're trying to fix through our solutions, and especially the sad and hopeless, it's gone up exponentially. There's been a 3,000 kid increase in the last several years over sad and hopeless feelings. Also, serious thoughts and planned suicide have also increased. So a couple specific stats from that. 31.4% of kids felt sad or hopeless. This is 14,000 students in Colorado, and this is 500 kids at Windsor out of the 1,500. This is almost a third of the student population. And only 6.9% of adults nationally feel this way. And comparing to the 30% of kids who feel this in Colorado, this is too many to be feeling this hopeless. Also, 17% seriously considered attempting suicide during the past 12 months. This is 255 kids at Windsor who could seriously consider attempting suicide. And also 13.1% who made a plan. This is almost 200 kids at Windsor out of the 1,500 who could have planned their own suicide. So, what's currently going on? What resources are available? So number 1, below the surface. This is a service provided 24/7 for health support, mental health support for everyone. This is part of Colorado Crisis Services, and you text TALK to 38255. And a stat from just help in general, 85% of people who get help become non-suicidal, become more mentally healthy. And click over real quick. I send a text to Colorado Crisis Services and texted TALK. A computed message comes to you instantly asking you for help, stating you ask for help, you state your name, address, and all that sort of information so they can put you online with a counselor in minutes. So this is one major help service that can exponentially decrease these rates. Also, Community Cares in Windsor, as Mayor Melinda said, is an event coming up locally to help kids with these issues, not only kids, but adults in all families. Also, 5 to Thrive Teen Health is it's a group in Greeley created in order to connect parents with teens, and they use social media to encourage teens and to support teens. So we're doing this on a local level. As we said, this is more for our project. So our main question: how can we improve mental health in Windsor? So first of all, these are our 3 solutions we came up with. So part of our project was to come up with 3 solutions so the town can see a variety of ways to increase mental health within Windsor.
Our first solution was holding more community events. So we thought the town of Windsor could host more events just raising awareness on mental health. And they would be engaging for all ages, and they'd be fun, and just hopefully the community would come and have a good time with them. But they would also be educational for adults and the children, and hopefully everyone could get involved in that.
Also, to add on to that, a trusted adult is the #1 protective factor in teen mental health, and this comes from Northridge Behavioral. But the majority of the teens, unfortunately, don't have this, and this is what we're trying to do with events, is connecting adults.
Okay, so the benefits would be to bring education to our community, and it would help connect us all even more, even though we kind of have that small town feel. And another one would be just raise awareness for mental health. The disadvantages, we would have to have a lot of time in planning, and it would also be probably not as cost effective to host all these events.
So our second solution, this is integrating a school event or class within the school curriculum or day. So this would be taking action every day, encouraging students to get more engaged and have a more active mindset. So some solutions we thought to this would be quarterly or biannual events that students would participate during the school day. And we thought of having a full school day dedicated to mental health and somehow combining activities with the kids in order to have them interact versus just a lecture type classroom environment. Also, these interactive activities would benefit the students much more, as a lot of students know. And mental health elective could also be put in place for kids who would want to help heal themselves through school. And so the benefits and implementation, it dedicates a whole day to mental health for kids in every class. And it's an interactive environment, as I said, and the interaction would both help bring students together and create more friendships and bonds within the student environment. So some disadvantages, obviously, there's going to be some like finding time to dedicate a day to these events and getting across to the school board to dedicate a whole day when we know we're already crunched for time. Also, finding resources such as food and volunteers would also be tricky to supply all these kids.
All right, so this is our third solution this is the third solution. So establish a mental health committee through the town of Windsor. And then basically what we're trying to accomplish with this committee is strengthening the bond that we have. So it handles all topics regarding mental health, so it covers a wide variety, so no one feels left out. And it involves the town board members, volunteers, mental health specialists, and therapists. So it would create that public-private partnership, so we can have people come in and volunteer and things like that, but we can also have physicians come in and things like that. And then so it would implement mental health awareness into the existing events in Windsor, so we could do things, we could cooperate with Windsor Cares and things like that and do those things. And then we would do public events that would involve schools, so we can work with the school and things like that. So that's that public-private correlation. And then, so the benefits of a committee, it creates an overall mentally healthier community. Yeah, and then it sheds more light on the available resources, because a lot of the time, a lot of people don't know where they can go, and that's why they have that helpless feeling, is because they don't know their resources as well. So this will give them an outlet and give them the resources they need. And then, so the disadvantages, obviously creating a committee is expensive, things like food and stuff like that. And if we do bring in physicians, they would hopefully be volunteers. It would take a lot of time and resources to find people who would specialize in the field and like to dedicate their time to the committee. So we would have to go out, and as the committee, we would have to go try to find those physicians and things like that that would be willing to give up their time. And then our main solution is what we chose. We would like to create a town-based committee. And then, so why we chose this? Because it brings awareness. A committee can carry out our other two solutions by helping create events and partner with organizations like the school. So we kind of combined all of them with that committee. And it's dedicated to making a mentally healthier community in Windsor. We have that hometown feel, and if we can really get together, that committee can help do that. And then collaboration, so it creates that public-private partnership. It connects the town with private institutions and schools, like North Range Behavioral and Counseling Partners of Northern Colorado. And it helps connect the students, teachers, and honestly anyone in the community together. And then, so we made this Venn diagram. So this, you're better at explaining this, but it just shows how they can all work together and things like that. But if you want to say more, you definitely can.
And as you see here, we have the teens in one category, the parents and adults in another category, and the town committee below. And so the teens, they're kind of in their own world here. They have a disconnect from parents and adults and the town committee. And then parents and adults, as you see, the available resources, and as I said earlier, the number one factor that many kids don't have is the trusted adult. So there's a split here. And what this town committee would do is bring everyone together right in the middle there. And the town would be able to connect to parents and adults by partnering with them if parents and adults want to be part of it, as well as teens. And the town committee is going to want to connect to these teens. And with that, the events they're going to host and the places they're going to partner with is going to create this middle ground that's going to connect everyone and overall make the community more mentally healthy.
And then, so is this the best solution? And I think that's a question that we had to ask ourselves when we were making this, and we feel that it is. So it is less cost because it is volunteer-based, and time would be the primary cost, so we would just have to find people to give up their time. And then we have our branching. So community influences the integration of mental health into schools and public events, which we have already done, but we would like to build on that and really make it big. And then it reaches to the community in a multitude of ways. So it advertises awareness, flyers, events, etc. We can really get the word out, and we're hoping that this can spread through word of mouth, since we are we have a small town. But we can really get the word out and do those things. And then it helps with school activities, so we could, I know we have specified nights at our school, but we can help with that. We can also give our time to that as well. And then it provides resources for people who truly need it, and they can really reach out and they feel comfortable, because like Carrick said, the number one leading cause is not having someone. It's a trusted adult, but if you have anyone who you can really go to and trust, it builds that relationship, and it truly helps people. And then, so our town-based committee, it would be like the trunk of our tree, and it would just cause the branching out. So our committee would help facilitate public events, advertising awareness, and providing resources to the schools and things like that. So this town-based committee would really be the basis of everything we're trying to do.
So how can the committee influence the town, and why is this beneficial? So number one, events. The events that the committee would create provide interactive learning experiences and meaningful learning experiences. This connects the adults with the teens, and it's also educational. We can bring in people such as guest speakers and people who have had personal experience with this stuff to educate anyone who wants to be involved. Also, we can create a fun environment such as games and runs or concerts to all bring everyone together through that interaction. So number 2, schools. Through schools, the committee can connect therapists to schools, and therapists work with students over video calls was one example we had, and a lot of therapists are required volunteer work, and we can do this through connecting therapists with schools and having these therapists volunteer their work to these kids and helping out these kids when they don't actually have to take time to go to the school. Also, they collaborate schools to create more events through the schools, and overall it just advertises awareness within the schools at a greater scale than it is now. So number 3, and it provides resources. So it provides a lot of resources for those in need, and it publicizes these resources to become more apparent. And a lot of the things this committee would do would be partnering with a lot of local organizations such as North Range or Below the Surface to help people within our community know more resources available for everyone.
Okay, so our action plan, how are we going to make this happen? Our goal is to raise awareness through this committee, and we want to have members of the committee, like volunteers, of specialists, of psychology, and we want to advertise this to parents that are unaware and make sure they can connect with their children or just any young adults that are, or young children that are having issues with their mental health. Next slide.
And through this Bridging the Gap, as that previous slide said, we want to create this trust with adults and kids, not just parents, but all adults. We want to create more connections with that in order to create these bonds where kids can go to these trusted adults in situations where they're struggling.
You're good. Our committee would be volunteer-based to cut down on costs. We would have specialists, like I said. We would have to create connections to influence them to volunteer, because I feel like it would be challenging to get volunteers, but maybe we can. Anyone in the community could help as long as they have some knowledge on mental health. Like, for example, victims of mental illness or bystanders, or even family with children that have mental issues. How will we reach out to volunteers? We'll create a new volunteer board, like through the town of Windsor. We would draw members from the community. Expertise especially would be wanted, obviously. We could have applications where they could fill them out through the windsorgov.com to apply. Windsor residents are encouraged to apply, obviously. We need to raise awareness. Some events that are happening right now, as of April 22nd, Mayor Melendez proclaimed May as Mental Health Awareness Month. Some more current events. Most of these are happening in Denver. NAMI is National Alliance on Mental Illness, walks Colorado. It's like a big walk where everyone in Denver gets together and does a walk for mental illness. Quarterly Imagine Zero, that's where men stand up and speak on their actual experience and that they've had with mental illness. Mental Health 101 is basically a seminar where people stand up and teach about mental illness and the cues to see in children or yourself. And then there's a Mental Health Awareness 5K. I think it happened earlier this month, and it was in Denver. And then September Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Overall, a mental health committee for Windsor would work best because it aims to create a mentally healthier community, which we need. It would address mental health in a multitude of ways. It encourages Windsor to bond as a community.
So help us create a mentally healthier community.
Okay.
Thanks.
How about a big round of
And then if anyone has questions, you're more than welcome to ask if we have time, obviously. But we would love to answer questions on anything you guys were wondering.
First and foremost, I am compelled to come down because I want to shake each and every one of your hands this evening, because you showed great courage to be here this evening to share a very important message with all of us. I also feel that I am standing amidst some future great leaders of our community. And so there's two things I'm going to ask of you. One, if we can get a copy of this presentation for us. Two, or actually three things. Two, would you make sure they all get a challenge coin before they leave the chambers this evening? Because certainly you have risen above the challenge to be here. You've done a lot of homework and education. And lastly, though, I would ask that you not lose your enthusiasm and your appeal of the direction that you are going. Because you have shown great insight and care, which is what Community Cares Night is all about. So I've been in this community serving in public service for 10 years, and Community Cares Night is an accumulation of lots of conversations I've had over the years with parents, with kids, with our special resource groups, with our police officers, with our schools. And what I wanted to instill in us is we don't want to be that next community that has that very tragic accident that happens here. And how do we prevent that? We prevent that by going back to the core of what we all love about being in Windsor. We all love being in Windsor because we love our kids and we are family connected. And so if we go back to that core and we care above and beyond just the internal family members that we have, because that's what Community Cares Night is all about. So it means that even if your mom and dad don't want to go, kids, you need to come out, because we got other adults who are going to be there for you, and vice versa. Adults, even if you don't have kids in your home or your place anymore, please come out to this event, because that is what the event is all about. Because it is true, we need to make sure that everybody has that one person and that one place that they can go, because we don't want to lose another kid or another person in our community if we can help it. And certainly, this is only the start. And I hope I will be term limited here, and I will be leaving my place as your public servant next April. But I'm hoping that Community Cares is an ongoing event that will not only continue year to year, but as you just demonstrated, can maybe develop and envelop into much bigger and broader things. So thank you so much for coming out this evening. And again, I applaud you, and I think everybody else should applaud you for the courageousness that you have shown in coming before us this evening. Thank you. And with that, we are on item 6 of our board agenda this evening, which is board liaison reports. Town Board Member Baker, Tree Board, and Historic Preservation Commission.
Yes, thank you. I have no meetings to report on since my last update. However, tomorrow night is Sick Tree Day, so you will possibly see the tree board out and about in the community looking at trees that have been reported to them. That's it.
Okay. Town Board Member Wilson, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Board, and Poudre River Trail Corridor.
In our last meeting for Parks, Recreation, and Culture, it was what I thought was a pretty cool meeting. The staff took the Community Advisory Board out on a bus tour to look at some of our parks, but more importantly, every year we go through budgets and prioritize projects, and Parks and Rec is always in that conversation. Either building new things or maybe maintaining or upgrading an existing park. And to go out into the community with citizens and actually put your feet on the ground and actually visualize some of these things that the town was thinking about was really beneficial, and I think gave staff the opportunity and myself to get some real-time feedback from the community on some of the great ideas that are going on right now. And then the other thing regarding to Parks and Rec, as well as the Poudre River Trail, some of you may have seen in the newspaper some articles about some partnerships with the town of Windsor, Timnath, Fort Collins, and Larimer County to complete the trail connection between Windsor, Timnath, and Fort Collins. And I feel like I've been sitting up here for about a year saying it's kind of been in the works, but Larimer County did make a deal that's been in the works for about a decade to acquire rights to the land that was necessary. So looks like that project will be moving forward. And if you look at the Fort Collins, Colorado newspaper, they have a map and there's some other information that's out there, or you can ask questions afterwards. That's all for this week.
Mayor Pro Tem Bennett, Water and Sewer Board.
Water and Sewer Board met June 12th. They approved a revised statement of their roles and responsibilities that will be presented to the board at a future date. They also had a presentation on the procedures and the costs for the inserts that are included in our water bills. And it was explained to them that those have to be targeted, planned out in advance, and they had some conversation about some potential future topics as it relates to water. Communication, there was notification that Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District does tours. This is for our board as well as anyone who has interest in those. They take people on a tour of the water systems on the eastern slope. June 27th, that one's already full. There'll be another one on September 18th. And really cool one, it takes people on a bus on the western slope and you see the origins of the rivers and how the water's brought over here. That's August 15th. They also made the announcement that the water leaders class applications are out, and today was the deadline. So I think we have some people from Windsor who have applied for that.
Okay. Town Board Member Rennemeyer, Chamber of Commerce.
I only have one update tonight. There hasn't been a regular meeting of the Chamber of Commerce since our last meeting. But I wanted to mention one thing because it pertains to our board. Last Thursday afternoon, we were up at our conference, but there was a ribbon cutting at the Chimney Park redevelopment south of the mill, the flour mill, and the lumber company over there. It was exciting that it was going on only because it was the redevelopment of that land that's been in the middle of Windsor, but it's been lacking development. And I remember we all approved that within the last year. And thanks to Elevations Real Estate, they are selling those units now. So it's exciting, just for the redevelopment factor is why I wanted to bring it up. So.
Town Board Member Jones, Windsor Housing Authority and Great Western Trail Authority.
The Housing Authority did meet last week, but I was at the CML meeting, so obviously I couldn't attend. I did check with the manager of Century 3, and basically most of their meeting was involved in discussing the planning of Golden Meadows, the new senior citizen housing that's underway. And Great Western Trail Authority, no report.
Okay. Town Board Member Kozlowski, Clearview Library Board and Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. As with others, I didn't make the Planning Commission meeting last week, being at the Colorado Municipal League Conference. The Library Board meets Thursday. I will be attending that meeting. I have looked at the agenda on that, and the materials is posted on their website. They're continuing just reporting year-to-date activity with the library, which is looking very strong. They are also continuing their strategic planning effort, and a number of people are meeting independently with their consultant regarding their strategic planning effort. That will be updated on Thursday as well. And they are also considering bylaw revisions, which is on the agenda for Thursday. So if anyone is interested in those issues, it is an open meeting held at the library at 5:30 Thursday.
Okay. And I have Downtown Development Authority, which canceled its June meeting. So we won't be meeting again till that third Wednesday in July. I believe it's July 17th. And I don't have a report from North Front Range MPO because we have not met since my last report. With that, item 7, public invited to be heard. Did we have anybody sign?
No.
Okay. So seeing as we don't have anybody who wish to address the board, public invited to be heard, we'll move on to item B, which is our consent calendar. Consent calendar consists of 2 items this evening: minutes of the June 10th, 2019 regular meeting and resolution number 2019-46. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the consent calendar this evening as presented.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Wilson to approve the consent calendar as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Consent calendar is approved unanimously. Moving on to item C, board action for this evening. First item this evening is ordinance number 2019-1589, a smoking ban in parks, open space, and trails ordinance. Its first reading will take legislative action, and Ms. Foch will be giving us presentation this evening. Ms. Foch.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Town Board. So tonight in front of you, we have the ordinance number 2019-1589, which is the smoking ban in parks, open space, and trails. As we have before you is the first reading of that ordinance, and then this ordinance does require legislative action. So just some background and discussion on this. Back in late fall, early fall of 2018, we met with the Parks, Rec, and Culture Advisory Board, and through that board meeting, they came up with a list of about 8 to 10 different issues and items that they would like to discuss and work on as a group. Out of that, the number 1 item became the smoking and vaping in parks ban. After that, we reached out to the Weld County Health Department. We've had numerous, about 8 to 10 meetings with the health department folks. Through that, we came up with a survey that we posted online. Through that survey, we then met with the police chief and his team. And then through that, had a work session with the Parks, Rec, and Culture Advisory Board, and then obviously the work session that we had with you guys on April 22nd. Through the survey results, we did have 1,057 responses to the online survey, with 84% of those respondents that were supportive of banning smoking and vaping in our parks, open space, and trails. So our recommendation tonight is based on the results of the survey and the discussion that we've had with Pre-Cab, the police department, town board. Staff is recommending that we ban smoking and vaping in all parks, open space, and trails, and the CRC campus, with the exception of parking lots. So here's just an example, as we talked about in our work session, that we would do, if approved through the first and second reading, that we would do an education campaign. Up here is just an example of what the health department can assist us with the education campaign. That if it does pass through the second reading, we would work on this campaign throughout the rest of the year, and then also if it passes, it would go into effect January 1st of 2020. And then obviously we would continue that campaign throughout the event season of 2020 also. But in that, it includes the enforcement and signage, just initial announcements. We talked about giving out little palm cards and event announcements, some teardrop flags in parks, and then just educating our seasonal staff as they come on board throughout those heavy summer months. Does anyone have any questions this evening?
Are there any questions for Ms. Foch? No. Okay. Mr. McCarter, at this point, do we take public comment or do we wait till second reading?
Wait until second reading.
Okay.
I mean, you may take public comment, but you're required to take public comment at second reading.
Okay. Okay, is there a motion then, Mr. Sosowski?
Sorry, Mayor, I can't help but ask. Could you put a picture up of burned out grass to stress the smoke-free?
What it will do, I can do that next
Is
time,
that
yeah,
the-
for a second reading. You got it.
That was after our fireworks presentation a few years back.
So we would bring the second reading, if tonight's passes, back to you sometime in July.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2019-1589.
Second.
A motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett approving ordinance 2019-1589. On favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 2, a public hearing for ordinance number 2019-1590, repealing and adopting by reference the 2018 International Building Codes. First reading, legislative action. Mr. Balstead's going to be giving presentation. I would seek a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rettemeyer, the second for Ms. Dr. Jones. All in favor vote yes. Opposed, no to open public hearing. Public hearing is now opened. Mr. Balstead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Board. You'll recall from the April 15th Town Board work session, the town is looking at adopting the 2018 International Building Codes. I have Caleb Sulzan, the local Windsor Safe Build Office building official here, and we'll run through a brief presentation and then answer some questions that came out of that April 15th work session. So,
So thank you again. I'm Caleb Sulzan, building official here in Windsor. We'll try to run through this really quickly. We'd already reviewed it again back in April, but if you have any questions or would like me to elaborate on something, please go ahead and ask. One change that we had made on staff recommendation on this is instead of the 2012 International Energy Conservation Code, after the discussion at the work session, we're recommending the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code. So all of the codes from the International Code Council would be on the 2018 edition. The National Electrical Code, because it's produced separately, is on the 2017. That's adopted by the state, and so we follow the state code with that. Again, this is the currently adopted codes by other jurisdictions in northern Colorado. Several others have completed the code adoption process recently since the last presentation in April. So Timnath, some Nunn, Alt, Kersey, Wellington will be completing it tomorrow night. So there's a number of other jurisdictions who are now updated onto the 2018 building codes as adopted, and the effective dates will be, for most of them, will be August 1st or September 1st. Some of the current amendments, these were amendments that were currently in effect with the 2012 code that's currently in enforcement. So any work exempted from a permit for fences, that was amended from 7 feet down to 6 feet to align with the town zoning codes. Definitions for sleeping unit to be able to define what a bedroom is, make that a little clearer when we get into multiple dwelling units and dormitories. Guard protections were added if you have a window well greater than 30 inches deep for protection of people walking if there's a walking surface within 3 feet. And emergency escape and rescue openings were allowed to remain if the structure was built prior to 1999. They're allowed to remain under the existing code rather than being updated. So some of the proposed amendments really quickly, there was an amendment or a new code requirement that said that if you fully sprinkled a building, whether it was residential or a commercial building that had residential units in it, that you would not be required to have a direct escape opening from a bedroom that was in that basement to the outdoors. So we feel like that was a very ill-advised proposal, so that was recommended to be removed both from the commercial and the residential code. Some of the state codes that were adopted for electrical included the location for carbon monoxide detectors and changed the wording from immediate vicinity of a bedroom to within 15 feet of a sleeping room. Wind speed tables were reworded, and some of the corridor ratings we increased from 30 minutes to an hour because there is no design for a 30-minute rated wall construction, but there is for an hour wall construction. Occupant loads for businesses, if you're in a business occupancy, increased from 100 square feet per occupant to 150 square feet per occupant. This was significant. If you look at the bottom line on this slide for separate restroom facilities, that increased from 15 to 25. So under the old code, it was 100 square feet per occupant, and at 15 occupants, you had to have separate restroom facilities at 150 square feet for that business. Now with it increased to 150 square feet and 25 occupants, that's 3,750 square feet, so it more than doubled the size of a business. So if a new owner was to come in and convert a residence into a business or change of use in a business in an existing building, Now they have a much larger area they can work with before having to jackhammer up a slab and add a separate restroom facility. So it makes it a lot more flexible to bring new businesses in. Some of these other amendments is just redoing some wording and some additional requirements on large wood trusses for commercial structures for special inspections. Again, in the residential code, this is in the IRC, so moving from the IBC to the IRC. Some of the same amendments for the fence height, for exterior walls. Again, we removed a lot of these sections that said if you fully sprinkle a residence or a building, that you wouldn't have to have fire separated rated walls between a house and a garage or between houses. So we removed those exceptions to leave the rated walls in place. And that ties into another amendment you'll see later where we recommend not requiring sprinkles in new single-family construction. Again, the emergency scrape and rescue openings, these are all the same requirements that have been in place. Fire protection of floors, we added 3 options. This is in cooperation. It was actually drafted by Weld County and Larimer County, and in cooperation with the fire districts in the 2 counties. The code currently requires that if you have an unfinished basement with I-joist construction, which is approximately 90% of the construction we're seeing, you would have to sheetrock the full underside of the floor to protect it if there's a fuel-fired furnace in the basement, which 9 times out of 10 there is. And so we had removed that and deleted that requirement in the past. Now there are 3 additional requirements to where you can enclose that room, that furnace room, in an 80 square foot room, sheetrock both sides of the walls, put a self-closing door on it, and you have 3 options for protecting the ceiling, which would be a single sprinkler head off of your cold water line coming into the house, sheetrock the ceiling, or use fire-rated joists above that 80 square foot room. And so those 3 additional protections would give people additional options without requiring them to sheetrock the entire underside of the floor in an unfinished basement. Again, the same proposed requirements for removing the exception for escape and rescue openings. They would still be required even if someone elected to sprinkle their home. Carbon monoxide is the same amendment. And there's about 5 new pages in the code dealing with decks. Decks used to have to follow the same charts and tables as interior framing for full framing on a house. Now there's more flexibility through these tables. It also includes lateral load restraints. That's where we see a lot of injuries happening with deck collapses is, people stand at the outside edge of a deck that's cantilevered past a beam. That creates a seesaw effect with the fulcrum where it's pulling up away from the house, and that movement shifts the weight and the load away from the house, pulls it laterally, and causes the deck to collapse. So these lateral load restraints both have an option of either back at the house or bracing to the posts to prevent that movement and try to reduce deck collapses. Some new sections that were added for new technologies. Solar energy has become a big mover and shaker in the industry. So there's new sections that address solar that weren't previously in the code. And not only the electrical components of the solar, but the structural components. How is that going to be supported on a roof, both for the weight, which is usually fairly minimal, but also because we have high winds, the wind load, where the wind going underneath those solar panels is now lifting up against the roof structure to make sure it's anchored properly and has a proper support for those systems. Habitable attics was amended to where now it would be considered an additional floor above grade or a story above grade if it exceeds certain parameters like half of the square foot of the floor below. That really comes into play where it could kick someone in their home from a residential structure to a commercial structure if it is a 4th story above grade. So if your basement is more than half out of the ground level, and then you have a 1st floor and a 2nd floor, basements more than 50% above grade are considered a story above grade. Now your 1st floor is your 2nd level, 2nd floor is your 3rd level, and if you have a large habitable attic, even enclosed within the roof structure, that could be your 4th level. Now you're into the commercial code instead of being able to build that house under the residential code. Storage battery systems, these are being used with a lot with both solar energy as well as with vehicle charging systems to have backup power to be able to recharge these vehicles. They're large batteries that create a hazard. If you put it inside the house rather than inside the garage, the risk of explosion or fire is greatly increased. But because of fire separations and other provisions that are already built into the garage, these would be required to be stored in the garage or in a protected space for the installation. Tesla is one of the main manufacturers of these, along with their vehicles and their solar systems. Unvented crawl spaces can now be ventilated using a dehumidifier system rather than mechanical ventilation. And again, exterior decks. Dryer exhausts, if you run it up through the wall, now you'd have to do a 6-inch wall frame because you have a 4-inch round dryer duct. A wood stud, even a 2x4 is only 3.5 inches, so there's not enough room to get that into that 3.5-inch wall, so it would have to be a larger wall to fit that. This last one on the slide is one that would have a major impact with some of the larger homes we're seeing, where now these large homes would be able to put commercial cooking appliances into a residence. Previously that was prohibited by code. Now, as long as it's designed by an engineer and that design has to include proper ventilation to be able to remove grease-laden vapors, you could put a large 5-foot, 6-foot commercial cooking appliance in a residence. And we're seeing more of these proposals in some of the large 12, 15, 20,000 square foot homes. So again, this provides the means for people to be able to put these larger appliances. A few appendix that we're recommending for adoption would be the radon control methods in Appendix F, patio covers, which is currently adopted, and Appendix M for home daycare, with a few amendments that we've included on that to regulate building safety when a daycare is held within a residence. It would not be required to be sprinkled for home daycare, whereas in the main body of the code, it would be. We added an amendment to where we have additional options with 2 egress points from that basement and limits on the number of care recipients along with the care provider to offset that safety, by not requiring it to be sprinkled for the residents. We've provided offsets there. That's the way the code works in general for safety, is if you give, you take. You have some both ways. So if you allow to exceed one safety requirement, then you offset it with another. So again, radon at the top one, it's one of the large issues here in the northern Colorado and all along the Front Range. So these would require new homes, not if you do a renovation or refinish your basement, but for new home construction, it would be required to have a radon mitigation system. Would not be required to be active with a fan boost, but would at least have to have the piping put in for a passive system to release radon to the atmosphere. Fire sprinklers for townhomes. There's been, between 2013 and 2015, almost 110,000 fires, resulting in over 400 deaths. And it creates a greater risk because you have a shared wall between residences. So if a fire starts in your home, it not only is impacting your home and the inhabitants within your home, but also the adjacent units and your neighbors. There were minimal changes, mostly administrative, for the mechanical code, the field gas code, and plumbing codes. There were some changes to the boiler design temperatures for commercial systems. And then that brings us to the energy code. This was one of the really kind of in-depth ones that we hit on at the work session. But just briefly for this chart, it shows in each column the 2006 energy code, 2009, 2012, 2015, and 2018. There was a state bill passed, I believe it was April, that requires that when a new building code is adopted by a jurisdiction, that one of the 3 most recent energy codes be adopted at the same time as well. Currently, we're on the 2009 energy code, so that state bill would require to update to one of the 3 most recent, 12, 15, or 18, and we're recommending going to the 18. The differences between the 12 and 18 are very minimal. In the prescriptive requirements, it would go from, for windows, which is your fenestrations, your U factor would increase in the energy rating from a 0.32 to a 0.30. The lower that number goes, the greater energy rating is provided. So again, most of the windows that are being manufactured today are 0.30, 0.29 or better. and they're being marketed for energy efficiency. You really aren't going to find even a 0.32 window on the market. The rest of the energy requirements for skylights, ceiling R value stays the same. It increases from 09, from 38 to an R49. And another increase from the 09 to the 12 and more recent is going to be basement wall R values going from a 13 between the 13 continuous or 17 between the studs to a 15 continuous insulation or 19 between the studs. But again, from 2012 to 2018, that does not change. The major change between the 2012 and 2018 would be the 3 testing methods. So those are blower door testing for tightness of construction. That's both for residential and commercial structures. Duct blast testing, that's only for ductwork that's outside the building thermal envelope. So if you have, the type of house we're typically seeing built is a single story residence or 2-story on a basement, but usually a single story on a basement. The furnace is in the basement inside the conditioned space, and all the ductwork is within the conditioned space. Because you're not going outside of your insulated envelope of the structure, you wouldn't have to test it, because even if there's a leakage in that duct, it's still within your conditioned space. You're not releasing it to the environment and losing that energy. But if you had, let's say for example, a 2-story home over a basement where now you have a second furnace in the attic and you have ductwork in the attic that's above your insulation, that ductwork would be required to be tested, because if there was a leakage there, you're releasing it to the atmosphere. So probably 80% of the homes wouldn't require the duct blaster testing because the majority of the ductwork is within the conditioned space. The blower door test would be required for, like I said, all residential and commercial. So what that does is they put a big fan, they have a frame that fits the door of the home. The fan spins to remove air from the house, depressurize it, and based on how fast the fan has to spin in order to maintain that negative pressure within the structure, they'll run calculations and determine how much air leakage and whether it falls into acceptable range. Commissioning of appliances is for commercial structures and appliances for larger systems, and that's done to make sure that they're running at the proper energy efficiency that they were designed to. Not only were they installed properly, which we check by the code, but now they would have to be tested to make sure that they're running efficiently and they meet their design. So those are the primary differences. A couple amendments that we included with that. Again, you have the commissioning for mechanical and electrical systems on the 2018 Energy Code. We did add an amendment in the residential portion. The 2018 code also separates residential and commercial. Instead of having them lumped into the same section, they have residential provisions and commercial provisions separated out. And so in the residential portion, we had an amendment saying that if you had already recently built your home in the last several years and it met the 2009 Energy Code requirements for the insulation that was installed on the walls, if you pull a permit now under the 2018 code to finish off your basement, we wouldn't require you to increase that 2R value that the new Energy Code increased, since it was already insulated under the 09 code at the time it was constructed. So we didn't feel like that would be a reasonable expense or requirement. Another change in the 18 is all swimming pool provisions were removed from both the residential and commercial codes and lumped into a new code that we have for the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. This addresses occupant loads for commercial pools, so if we had any new rec pools or town pools that were installed, there's new requirements for open space around the pool, so it's not too crowded around the edge of the pool where people are being bumped into the pool by other people walking past, and additional calculations for restroom facilities to make sure that you have enough restroom facilities for the occupants there at the pool, as well as new requirements on access in and out of public pools or community pools. Another change that was added in the 18 for residential pools, and we've issued, just in the last 6 months, we've probably issued 4 or 5 amendments to the 2012 code based on the 2018 provisions that are out to allow people to use automatic pool covers over their residential pool instead of building a barrier around the pool. in the yard. So the 2018 code allows that. That pool cover has to meet testing and weight requirements. It has to be able to hold at least 200, no, it's I think they calculated 400 pounds. Someone walking out into the middle of the pool to where an adult, if they're chasing a child out onto that pool cover, wouldn't go through the cover. So it's a pretty hefty requirement to support that weight. It's the same requirement as you would have on a hot tub, but a hot tub is usually only maybe 7 or 8 feet across. A pool could be 20 or 30 feet across. So you have to support that same amount of weight over a much wider span. But that's, in lieu of having a barrier that would prevent someone getting into the pool area. Again, this slide talks about the exception for the barrier and some of the other amendments that I just discussed. And then a few decision points that we had asked the board to make were whether or not to adopt fire sprinklers and mandate those for townhomes, whether or not to require them for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Again, we had recommended that the board adopt it for townhomes, for multiple attached dwelling units, but not for single family dwellings. There was some discussion at the work session about whether or not to require it for duplexes when you have 2 attached units. And so that would be one area we'd ask for direction on or decision, and we could make the amendment in the ordinance language based on the board's direction. And then the adoption of the 2018 Energy Code was recommended. We didn't really touch on the presentation, but reclaimed water systems was included in the state plumbing code, but it would put a lot of regulatory requirements on the town to, if any of these systems were installed, to track and test the systems. This would allow toilets to be flushed with water from sinks, showers, washing machine, and dishwashers. But the system would have to hold the water, it would have to have chemicals and treatment, and it's still a new regulation that needs a lot of work, honestly, and puts a lot of burden on the town, so we're strongly recommending not adopting that at this time. It doesn't allow to water yards or anything other than flushing toilets, so at this point the savings in water is minimal, and it needs a lot of work on the regulation. And then the 3 alternatives that we had added for fire protection of floors was the other point that we had asked for feedback on from the board. And are there any questions?
Are there questions from the board? Mr. Lamar.
Are there any, I saw that you had the home daycare as a, what would you call it, a exclusion? Was it an exclusion?
And it was an amendment.
Amendment? I was just curious if there's any new amendments for home-based businesses. Is there anything with the new codes that, is stricter on that? I mean, home daycares, I don't know if it's because obviously there's little people in the house, et cetera, and increasing the total occupancy of the home at the time of the business is open. But I just was curious, there's a lot of home-based businesses, et cetera, if there's anything new in the code that would be, pro or con home-based business.
There isn't really anything new added in, but there are existing regulations for a business, especially if you're bringing in public and you're changing a partial use of the home. And when they apply for a town business license, then the town forwards that to us at SafeBuilt, and we go out and we do a business license inspection on the structure prior to the town approving their business license. So there's already currently regulations for that, and depending on what the business is and to what extent they're operating, if they're bringing public in or if they're just operating like an online internet-based business and they're not really doing anything other than sitting in their living room on a computer, it depends a lot on what the actual use for that business is going to be as far as what would be required for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Bennett.
Regarding the gray water, I've just recently seen some information about some of the innovations about home use of gray water. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what might we anticipate in 5-10 years? And I agree. Right now, it looks like it's minimal savings of water, but where is this going in the future?
Yeah, so there is a lot of proposals for future editions of the code. Right now, the International Code Council that is the body that creates the codes is going through discussions this year on the 2021 codes, which we would potentially skip over unless it had something like this that was wanted to be adopted. And a lot of the things that are being proposed is more extensive systems that require a larger holding tank and more treatment to it. And then the piping from that system has to be identified. You can't just run it to where, you know, if someone says, oh, I want to add another bathroom in my basement, and they tap into a water line, not realizing that it's a gray water system, and now they're running it to a shower or a sink in a basement bathroom. So all the piping has to be identified. There's, you know, and so there are additional, you know, safety provisions that are being built into it. And from a construction standpoint, the regulation and the tracking is really where things break down right now, because with the system, you know, you have treated water that's sitting in an open toilet. You know, whether a child, you know, were to put their hands in it, and, you know, and maybe get some kind of contamination, or if a dog were to drink out of it, you know, that, you know, those are some of the concerns right now of how would you, you know, it's not really treated to a level where it would be safe. It's not going through the same treatment process that like a sewage treatment plant would go through to purify water. It's simply adding some chemicals to that used water.
Any other questions?
So right now, it's irrigation only, correct? The way the code is written, it can be only used for irrigation?
No, it could only be used to flush toilets. So that reclaimed water would only be allowed to be in the tank, you know, piped from that storage tank to the toilet tank, and would be open in the toilet bowl. It would not be allowed for external use for irrigation. So if they are able to increase it or improve it to where that water could be used for external use for gardens or lawns for irrigation, then that would be probably a much more beneficial use. But I don't know if that would conflict with other water rights regulations, and that would be another thing that we would have to work through at that point.
Mr. Sosowski?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess the quick thought in my mind, it was only a year ago that we were allowed to even have rain barrels. And even then, we could only have so many for so much water. I guess there may be a conflict between building code and water law as far as how much that you can really trap and direct. The return flows are pretty critical, so I'm not sure what our decision would need to be on this issue now, today.
So based on our discussion at the April 15th work session, we are not including the gray water systems in this ordinance.
And I guess procedural, I guess the other decisions that he had had up there.
If I could just recap, sorry.
That was my,
Yeah, so as Caleb indicated, there was discussion at the work session about adoption of the energy code and whether or not that should be the 2012, 2018. And based on the fact that the new statute was just passed within the last month saying that we'll need to adopt one of the last three most current energy codes whenever we update our building codes going forward, staff, and based on what the research that Safe Built did, talking to some of the builders, so many of them are already using the 2018 energy code, and they really didn't hear a lot of concern regarding the additional cost for testing and verification of code compliance. Therefore, staff is recommending that the 2018 energy code be adopted. And as I indicated in the memo, we'll need to tweak the ordinance a little bit between first and second reading, as there is a difference in the way the code is laid out between 2012 and 2018. And so the ordinance just needs to be updated to reflect that organizational change. The question I believe that's outstanding is really the fire suppression sprinklers in townhomes. At the town board work session in April, there wasn't a clear direction on that item. The current ordinance does include the sprinklers, and that is obviously supported by the fire district as well. But the board had asked what the estimated cost would be for a townhome unit, and based on Safe Built's research, as is included in the memo, the cost starts at approximately $4,000 to $6,000 per unit, but can fluctuate greatly if the system requires a pump and water storage based on available water pressure. So the reason we're recommending approval of the fire suppression in townhomes is because we, when you have adjoining walls, and I believe the current code, we amended out the separation. What's the current situation that we're under?
So currently, we had increased, instead of putting sprinklers in townhomes, we had doubled the separation requirement for the walls between the townhomes from an hour to 2 hours. So fully sprinkling them would allow that separation wall to remain at an hour rather than being doubled to 2 hours. So there is, some trade-off back there. We would remove that amendment. And with going back to the testing, we did hold a contractor code update work session at the Public Works building a couple of weeks ago, and there were 25 contractors who attended, and we went through a presentation on these code changes, and everybody was on board. Like I said, already, Weld County, Larimer County, Fort Collins, they've all adopted these and most of the same amendments already. So the contractors are used to it being implemented in the area, and we also walked them through the process of the code updates and submitting their new plans to be reviewed under the new code. So, we're going to be holding another work session with contractors on Thursday, on the 27th, up in Timnath at their new town hall, and then another one on July 10th down in the city of Evans. And if we need additional meetings with contractors based on the feedback we're getting, if some weren't able to make it to those three, then we'll continue holding contractor information meetings so that they have every opportunity, even if they didn't attend these work sessions, to be aware of what the requirements are.
Mr. Sosowski, did you have anything further?
I would like to follow up, thank you, Mayor, only because I'm still really unclear as to what exactly procedure we were being asked to do. We have decisions apparently to make. We have only a recommendation regarding townhomes, but then following that, it talks about 1 and 2 family dwellings, and you mentioned duplexes, and I don't know what.
So duplex falls under the 2 family dwellings. There was some discussion at the work session on whether or not to require sprinklers in those duplexes since they have a shared wall between units, between dwelling units. But there, again, as Scott said, there wasn't a clear direction on whether the board wanted to include the 2 family dwellings but not the single family dwellings, or whether they wanted to just go with townhomes for fire sprinklers and not require sprinklers in 1 or 2 family dwellings.
When you mentioned your meetings that you've had with developers in the area who you said are fully aware of the 2018 requirements because of surrounding communities, did you specifically ask them about fire suppression in townhomes or duplexes and the reduction in the 2 hour to 1 hour?
Yeah, and they're on board with that. Again, it's coming in, other communities, and they're planning for it. So they're planning when they do their testing and their building design. Another thing that we've discussed at some of these meetings with the builders is if they have a community that's already underway of like townhome community, and let's say there's 10 or 12 buildings or rows of townhomes that are being constructed and they have half of them built and all of the infrastructure is already in place, we would exempt that community that's already has the infrastructure in place and not require them to come back and tear up the streets and put in fire mains, because it comes off a separate line for those fire sprinklers. Whereas if they're installing a new community, they're developing it and have the opportunity to put it in, it just wouldn't make sense to have them rip up the infrastructure and add a fire main for the last 2 buildings if the first 10 didn't have it in that community. So trying to work with them on that and keep it reasonable. And so given that understanding that we have with the builders, they're amenable to it. They understand that it's increasing the safety, and it overall in the grand scheme of it and the cost wise, it's a minor cost, but it pays much greater safety dividends than the cost.
Just one, if I may, just to go down that list, right at the bottom you have the protection of the flooring, and you had mentioned that you had drafted an amendment to give 3 options for that. So is that decided, or is it still a decision we need to make?
That is, well, we put it in the draft ordinance, and if the board decided that they didn't like that option, if they wanted to require fully sheetrocking the floors without the additional alternatives, then that we could remove the options or the alternatives. I feel like the alternatives are really offer some good flexibility for the builders and is less restrictive.
Are you finished?
So procedurally, if we, I mean, this is the hearing, I recognize, and we will next hear about this ordinance. If we adopt it, it still has open questions.
So the draft ordinance includes adoption of the 2018 Energy Code,
Right.
and it includes adoption of the residential sprinklers in townhomes. And so,
And duplexes.
I don't believe we included it for duplexes, but we could, that's an easy amendment that could be presented at the second hearing.
Okay, and the gray water was no.
and the gray water was left out.
And the alternatives for Florida.
Those are
in
included
there.
in the draft ordinance.
I think I'm okay.
Mr. Baker?
You sure?
No, I'm not actually.
I have a question on the sprinklers in townhomes. I had a townhome builder talk to me about the cost, and we're worried about affordable housing, and I think he said the same amount. But they questioned me, and I didn't know the answer. Would these be separate systems, or would the sprinklers tap into the existing water line that's within each unit?
No, they would be on separate systems, so it'd be separate from your water to where if the water was cut off, it wouldn't disconnect the system there. There is, in the residential code, there is an option for a sprinkler system that would tap off of the residential water. It would have to be upstream of the shutoff valve to the house so that you couldn't shut off water to the system. But on that house piping and coming off of the same system, it presents a number of problems because the piping isn't rated for heat, for like you would have in a fire. And so the testing they've done on those systems, it's susceptible to failure, where when you have exposed piping, like in an unfinished basement, that the piping running through the floor above, can melt quickly because it's not rated or intended for that use. So the fire districts have asked that to be removed and only to allow the separate sprinkler systems for those requirements. Again, most of the systems that we're seeing installed anyways are a separate system, and they use a special rated plastic line. Most of the time for residential, for townhomes, we're not seeing a black iron system installed. It's going to be plastic piping, so it is a lower cost. It's easier to install, so the installation cost is less. But it is rated for that installation rather than using your regular water piping like you would have running to your sink or your shower and using that for a sprinkler head.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I'm surprised at the cost increase, and I'm sensitive to that. But I'm inclined to support the sprinklers in the townhomes for various reasons. Number one, to be consistent across the region with what the counties are doing, as well as some of the surrounding communities. Also, if I recall correctly, our own planning commission had supported that change, as well as Safe Built, as well as our fire authority. And so I think that's very important. And I did watch some of the videos because I wasn't able to attend, where the fire stations do the two rooms, one with the sprinkler, one without. And I admit, in 1989 when I was in college, I lost everything in the fire and I was able to get out. And so knowing what a sprinkler can do for safety from a personal standpoint, I know when my son went to college, I made sure that his room had sprinkler system in there. And so I'd be inclined to do that. And for me, it feels like we're already doing it in apartment buildings as well, correct?
Yes, all commercial structures are required if they're over a certain threshold. So like small multifamilies currently would be exempt or wouldn't be required if it's like 4 units, but those requirements are changing now as well. So those thresholds, and again, that's enforced in the fire code adopted by the fire district for the commercial structures, where the crossover with sprinklers and building codes comes in is in the residential aspect. Mm-hmm. The commercial aspect is set by the fire authority.
Okay, so I don't see a reason why we would require them in apartments, but not a duplex or a townhome or a condo.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Any additional questions?
Sorry, I would like to follow up, because if I understood correctly, as drafted, we are recommending it in townhomes, but not in duplexes. And I'm not sure I see the rationale there, other than a smaller population. Only one family will be in there instead of 8, and I don't think. So am I right that the duplex you said was no?
In the way it's drafted currently, there's two sections in the code. One section addresses townhomes, the other is for 1 and 2 family dwellings, but it's lumped into the same language. Again, we can draft an amendment to separate that and require it, for 2 family dwellings for duplexes, but not for the single family. But the way it is in the code right now, those are the 2 separations, but it lumps 1 and 2 family together.
So the current draft doesn't include duplexes.
Yeah, the current draft would not require townhomes in a duplex. Again, that's a minor amendment that we could easily include.
Mr. Bennett?
Along that same line, I support the fire sprinklers in townhomes, but let's talk about the duplexes. If you have we'll call it a firewall, okay, and my neighbor starts a fire, I'm playing this out, the fire goes up, the roof, it's still gonna come over, right? It's still gonna affect the other half of the duplex.
Well, when you have a fire-rated construction, whether or not there is, a sprinkler system involved, that when you reach the roof, it has to extend 4 feet to either side. So the roof sheathing has to be fire treated as well for a minimum of 4 feet both directions of that separation wall. So the fire rating wall extends all the way up through the attic to the underside of the roof, and you have treated wood and have to spray the trusses and the roof system for 4 feet in both directions.
So what are the advantages and disadvantages of a sprinkler system in a duplex?
Good question. One of the things that a sprinkler system does is it protects the rear of the home better. One of the main causes of fire in a home is grills up against the back of a home and catching fire to the side of the house. Any grill manufacturer will say, maintain a 2-foot, 3-foot distance off of any siding so you don't catch fire. Where a sprinkler system would include an exterior dry head that would be over the patio. And so if there was a fire that started on the rear patio or deck, it could extinguish or contain that to keep it from spreading across the back of the home. Again, you have the same, separation up through the home and to the roof, but it does provide that rear protection. Is one of the advantages, and also you would be able to reduce your separation wall from 2 hour to 1 hour.
Do most entities who've approved this already extend it to this, or do they leave it as we currently have it?
There's been some that have gone both ways. It's almost 50-50. So it's really been up to the local board whether or not to include the duplexes.
I would be inclined to leave it as it is for right now because it's something we can always come back and add, right? Because we are making some pretty significant changes throughout already with this one implementation.
Yeah. One study that was done by the National Association of Home Builders on the changes in the 2018 code said that the cost of construction overall just in the residential codes, that's not taking into consideration the energy code changes, for the testing. But the residential code itself, because there are some things that they've added some additional trade-offs, that it's gone from either a reduction of $500 for a standard home to an increase of $100 if you built the same house under the 2012 to the 2018. So, they estimate that actually a reduction in cost overall through that to a minor increase. Again, the testing requirements, if you did all 4 testing like you would have to on a commercial structure, that would be $1,200 to $1,400 for the independent testing. If you only had to do the blower door test because all your ductwork was inside the home, then you're probably looking at about $300, $400 for the blower door test. So that would be a minimal cost on a basic standard home for that.
Do we build a lot of duplexes?
No.
Not a lot, no. It's a few, but just.
So if we included it, it wouldn't be.
No, I mean, typically we're going to see multifamily homes where there's stacked units, or you would see rows of townhomes or single-family homes.
Mr. Baker?
Maybe I missed this, but what's the rationale to not have townhomes? How do I tell my neighbors they don't have it or the townhomes do? They're still multi-family.
I mean, if you have a duplex, what's the rationale for not?
Yeah.
Well, the code lumps 1 and 2 family dwellings again because it's a smaller scale as You know, Mr. Soslavsky had mentioned that there's, you know, you don't have the number of exposure where
A
you have
duplex
units on
generally
both.
is one unit with,
Yeah.
consisting of two residences,
Mhm.
not
And-
multiple more than that.
Yes, and so a townhome is where, when you get into two shared walls instead of a single shared wall, and now you've got multiple units where you have neighbors adjacent to you on both sides, except for the end units would only have a single shared wall, but it does increase the risk.
I guess I just don't really see a difference.
Yeah.
And other than the common wall of one versus two. Okay.
Any final questions before we open up to the public hearing? Mr. Soslavsky?
And actually, Mayor, perhaps my comment will be addressed, because this feels like it could be a significant impact if we were leaning toward requiring the sprinkler systems, because I can't see why we wouldn't also require it in a duplex. I'd love to hear from the building community. I guess we've only heard it sort of secondhand from Caleb and by his conversations, but they're not here to my knowledge. And I guess we'd have that opportunity.
We did send out direct email notice, in addition to the public hearing notice in the paper. We sent out direct email notice to all of the builders that do the majority of work in Windsor, as well as Safe Built and the town both notified the Home Builders Association. So, and we've had the draft code, or the notice of the code adoption schedule on the town's website and at the building permit counter for last couple of months, and haven't really had much feedback.
But if they looked on the website, they would have seen the draft code, and the draft code does not require sprinklers in either townhomes or duplexes, right?
No, the draft ordinance that was proposed did require them in townhomes, but not in duplexes.
Okay. That seems to have gone back and forth a few times. Okay.
So this is the public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to address the board on this agenda item? This would be the time. Okay. Seeing none, is there any final questions? If not, I would seek a motion to close public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rittenmeyer with a second for Mr. Baker to close public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now closed. Moving on to item 3, ordinance number 2019-1590, an ordinance repealing and adopting by reference the 2018 International Building Codes. First reading and legislative action. Mr. Balstead, anything further to add?
Just to recap, that the ordinance as drafted includes the 2018 Energy Code, and we'll make some minor modifications to that before second reading to reflect the organizational changes between the 2012 and 2018 Energy Codes. The ordinance as drafted currently requires fire sprinklers in townhomes, but not duplexes. And then just to also point out, the contractor licensing program that was discussed at the April work session, staff is still working on that, and we'll bring that back later in the year. But staff is recommending approval of the attached ordinance, and it is consistent with the strategic plan safety goals and policies. And with that, the last thing I would point out is that we have made this, drafted this ordinance with an effective date of October 1st, so that we can further allow builders to switch out their stock plans with Safe Built and transition to the new code over the next few months.
So would that mean that if anybody wanted to come in before this code took effect, they'd have to actually, what actually has to happen? Is it, they have to have something built, started in the ground? They just have to have the review approved today?
They just
or
need
just started the process?
They just need to submit a complete building permit application before October 1st.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments? Mr.
Sorry,
Soslavsky?
I guess just Mr. McCarger, I just want to check, so if we adopt this ordinance today at first reading, then it's amended, perhaps materially if you add duplexes, Is it still second reading, even though it's a different ordinance?
It's still second reading. If we amend the language, if we modify the language, then our publication requirements are a little different. So instead of publishing by title only after second reading, we would publish the entire ordinance as adopted.
And there is opportunity for public comment at the second reading?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We know it'll be amended, if nothing else, to make the section revisions. Okay, thank you.
Anything further? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2019-1590.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett with a second from Mr. Rennermeyer approving ordinance 2019-1590. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Moving on to item 4, resolution number 2019-47. Resolution approving an agreement for economic inducements and development incentives for Mash Lab Brewing. Legislative action, Ms. Young will give presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and town board members. Tonight I have a presentation for you regarding the Mash Lab incentive approval request. Mash Lab is looking to expand their current location. On this map, the highlighted location on the bottom is their existing location, and strictly to the north of it is where they would expand onto their existing building. With this new building, it will be a total of 9,000 square feet, and you'll see a breakdown here. 3,600 square feet will consist of the restaurant, bar, and kitchen. 2,400 square feet will be brew production, and 3,000 square feet will be available for office space. The total expansion project cost is $2.7 million. We have received a 2019 request for development fee waivers, which would include admin fees, Windsor use tax, and that total is a little over $23,000. We also have been requested to consider development fee reimbursements, which would be within 60 days of certificate of occupancy. Those include the drainage fee and the road impact fee for a total of just shy of $46,000. So the total incentive request is a little over $69,000. On this breakdown, you will see what the total fee estimates would be for this project. At the bottom there, you can see that the total is just a little over $82,000. With this incentive package, we'd be looking at a payback of 2.4 years, and $45,813 would be affected on the Economic Development Fund, but would not take effect until 2020. At this time, staff is requesting approval of Resolution 2019-47 with incentive agreement for fee waivers and reimbursements for the expansion of the Mash Lab Brewery. Tonight, I do have Kristen Pratt, who she and her husband Eric own the property, and I believe she'd like to say a few words, and then both of us can answer questions.
Good evening. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for considering this. We're looking at expanding, putting in a restaurant, which is very needed in Windsor, especially up in that area of Highland Meadows with all the new houses going into Rain Dance that are so close, and the new apartment complex that I think people are starting to move in pretty quick this month. So yeah, we're just excited to expand in Windsor and provide something new and exciting, and just appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions for either the applicant or?
I have one for Jill.
Okay.
What was our rationale, refresh my memory, as far as the road impact fees for waiving that? And I see it's in the next agenda item as well.
So normally we would look at waiving the water fees, and since this is located in the Loveland Fort Collins Water District, that was not an option. So we looked at the road impact fees as something that we could offer to them.
And they would be backfilled by the Economic Development Fund, so we wouldn't actually waive those. Those funds would be made whole.
Correct.
We're just looking at a couple different buckets because, again, they're in Larimer County and we didn't have as much to offer, but they would be backfilled.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
me.
Mr. Kozlowski?
Yes, thank you. Just think, question for you as well. I was only, it confused me a little bit because you said, I think the total incentive would be a 69,000 plus, but the impact on the economic development budget was only 40-some thousand.
Right, those are the ones that would come out of the Economic Development Fund, not the ones that are waived upfront.
Okay.
So there's certain funds that we backfill because, we always backfill water and sewer and road impacts, park fees, other things like when we waive building permits, we don't backfill those. Those are just something that if we have any fees or taxes we collect, we don't backfill those. Like if we waive a use tax, we're putting tax money into the Economic Development Fund, so we don't backfill that, it's just a waiver.
So it looks like it's really the Windsor use tax then, am I right? That's not being backfilled?
That's right. It's just a tax waiver.
Okay.
The Windsor use tax and the administrative fee are the ones.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Bennett?
More of a statement. First of all, I really appreciate your work with Ms. Young on business retention, and I really appreciate supporting a local business and helping you grow. That's really great. I did have the same question about the road impact fees, and I understand it will be backfilled from our Economic Development Fund, but my comment is that that's still town money. We're taking from one account to backfill another account at a time when we're looking at a master transportation plan. So I hope we don't have to do this too often. I'm supportive of this proposal because I think it's a great business and a great opportunity to expand with local business, but I am concerned about our road impact fees.
Okay, anything additional, Dr. Jones?
And Jill, I don't think you mentioned this for everybody out there in television land. And I think it's very important when we're talking about these incentives, is the payback time that's been calculated.
Right.
Because when residents say, well, why did you give that business this or that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty important to note, how quickly this revenue returns to us.
Right, correct.
So it was what,
2.4 years.
2.4 years.
Right.
Okay.
What were the revenues? So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What were the revenues then that drove that payback?
The sales tax revenue that we calculated based on information that Kristen and Eric had provided us.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Good.
And we gave them very conservative
Very
revenue expectations, so.
Okay.
Could take
Hopefully
shortly.
it'll go much more.
One thing I'd like to add is just being on town board this last year, one of the things we hear about the most is the need for restaurants like this. So I plan to support it as well, and I think it'll be a wonderful addition and expansion to the town. Thanks.
Anything further? If not, I seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 2019-47.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rennemeyer with a second for Mr. Kozlowski, approving resolution 2019-47. All in favor, vote yes, opposed, no. Was it not you? Somewhere over here. Resolution passes unanimously. Thank you.
Minutes next time.
Moving on to item 5, resolution number 2019-48. Resolution approving an agreement for economic inducements and development incentives. This time for InterSand legislative action. Ms. Miller is giving presentation. Good evening.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and town board members. Tonight I'm bringing forth a manufacturing request for incentives. Get this open, sorry. So I started working with this company in November of last year. They are a Canadian company that has an interest in creating a new division in the United States. This will be their first American manufacturing facility. It's located on approximately 10 acres of the highlighted area, which is 16 acres in the Great Western Industrial Park. So you can see that highlighted area. They have yet to subdivide the specific 10 acres. That'll be a process they have to follow through our planning department, but they will have the option to grow even more if they need to add on more of those acres at that location. So this facility for the main phase is 48,000 square feet. Again, it's a manufacturing facility. The new equipment that they're looking to install at this facility is over $9 million. The total project cost is about $18.2 million. That does include both building, the land, and the FF&E, or furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which is that $9 million total I mentioned above. They are in 2 phases going to create 34 jobs for our community. And again, the use is strictly manufacturing. So the request was made for some development fee waivers. So the administrative fee was requested at 100% to be waived. We suggested that they do the Windsor use tax at 50% of the total request. So total amount of fees waived is over $66,000. The development fee reimbursements, again, which is something we don't do till 60 days within their certificate of occupancy, are the water plant investment fee at 50%, the sewer plant investment fee at 50%, and the drainage fee at 50%. So there is no road impact fee on this particular project being requested, simply because we have more control over the other funds. It's being developed in our backyard, not Fort Collins Loveland Water Sanitation District. So the total amount of fees to be reimbursed within 60 days is over $22,000, almost $23,000, and the total request for fees in incentives is $89,600. So when we talk about another request that was made, which is 50% personal property tax, so over 10 years that would equate to almost $90,000 in personal property tax request. That sheet is in your packet. You can see the breakdown with the depreciation schedule, and it equates to our total of again, $89,000. So the total incentive package for this particular company is just shy of $180,000. You can see the breakdown in their total fees. The total fees are $386,655.93. You can see the breakdown, specifically waiving 100% of the admin fee, again 50% of the Windsor use tax fee, and then 50% reimbursement after certificate of occupancy for the 3 main enterprise funds. Again, we reimburse those because by law they're enterprise funds. We have to be made whole, and that's why you have an economic development fund, is to backfill them and make them whole. So you can see we've run an economic impact analysis model on this, really tiny, sorry to see. There's a little bit better blown up version. The cumulative net fiscal benefit, this is our new model, so it does have our 2019 budget numbers in there. So any kind of expansions that we've had in any particular area, we've taken that into consideration in this model. And this is the true net benefit over 10 years with the building of the building, the equipment, property tax, and the revenue from employees. So you can see the 10-year total revenue to the town is $1.1 million. So the incentive payback is about just over shy of 1 year. The impact on the Economic Development Fund, which we anticipate will be in 2020, as they hope to be open by the beginning of the second quarter next year, is about $22,795. Current fund balance that we have right now is $191,000. Anticipating outstanding paybacks are the Kana Hotel Group. We anticipate this year, as well as EarthX batteries. And then next year we do have 2 others, as well as you've just approved MASH Labs, so that will be affecting on the fund. Those totals come up to about $187,000 of the $200,000 fund next year, if all of this gets approved and goes forward and actually comes to fruition and to be developed in 2020. So tonight, staff is recommending and requesting approval of Resolution 2019-48, an incentive agreement for fee waivers and reimbursement for the business attraction of Intersand.
Okay. Are there any questions for Ms. Miller on this project? Okay.
Just the
Mr.
procedure.
Sosowski?
This presentation was not in our package, right?
No, all the data is, but the presentation is not.
Right.
I can be more than glad to forward this to you if you would like one afterwards.
I think it's a little late.
So.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rennemeyer?
Do we have a projected opening? Did you say when Intersand?
By the beginning of the second quarter of next year. So they said March, but could be April of next year.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further? If not, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve resolution number 2019-48.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Wilson, approving resolution 2019-48. 48. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution passes unanimously. Moving on to item 6, economic development update. Again, Ms. Miller.
Just to stay right put. So thank you, Madam Mayor and town board members. So as you are well aware, we have different people that come in and speak on our partnerships with economic development throughout the year as we come and present. This month I was lucky enough, Brenda Dones, who is our Weld County assessor, was gracious enough to agree to come in and speak to you tonight. She spoke at your Coffee with the Mayor on May 18th that I attended, and I know I was receiving a ton of questions, as well as you all, I'm sure, dealing with the public about the significant increase in both the residential and commercial property taxes. So I've asked her here tonight to kind of speak to you all, the entire board, as well as to the public, to kind of talk about how those processes are handled in Weld County and how we get to why these amounts increased so much this way and those percentages. So I believe she has a handout for you as well. So I will introduce Brenda from the Weld County, our Weld County assessor.
Good evening, and we apologize for keeping our special guest so late this evening.
Oh, no, I understand. Do not worry. So I have a booklet for everyone and then a handout for everyone, if that's all right. I apologize that this is on paper. Oops, and I need to keep one of those. I didn't realize how technical you all are. Otherwise, I would have put this together on a PowerPoint and a presentation for you. But please bear with me as we go through some paper. I have spoken at other town boards, and they just like paper. So this is quite impressive. But I do want to thank Stacy for asking me to come speak tonight. We just finished our valuation of all property in Weld County, and so it's very timely. As a matter of fact, this is sort of hot off the press. So if your finance people are in the room, I don't know if your town manager actually handles your finance or if you have a finance director, but this is seriously hot off the press. They will be surprised at some of the data that I have for you tonight. I also want to thank you, Mayor Melendez, for inviting me to Coffee with the Mayor. It was about a month ago, and we had just sent out our notices of value for all property owners in Weld County, and we had a pretty good roundtable of constituents that wanted to talk about their business value, and it was just so beneficial, I think, not only for your residents but also for our office, so thank you so much. So if you own property in Colorado, then you received a notice of value from us sometime in early May. It doesn't matter whether you were in the Larimer County side, the Weld County side, if you owned property anywhere throughout the state, you received a notice of value from us. That's because across the state, all assessors revalue all real property every 2 years. We also revalue oil and gas personal property, natural resource property every single year. And so in Weld County, that breaks down to valuing about 145,000 properties every 2 years, and we value about another 35,000 properties every single year. And you know, once we send out those notices of value, then we instantly start hearing from taxpayers. They have the month of May in order to tell us how we did. It's such an interesting business because we send out 145,000 invitations to taxpayers and we say, just grade our work. Tell us how we did. You come talk to us if you don't think we did a good job. And this year we had about 5,700 property owners come in and visit with us. That's pretty normal for us in a reappraisal year. 2 years ago in 2017, we had about 5,200 property owners. So we were up about 450. Considering the amount of increase we saw in value in residential, commercial, industrial, we felt like that was a really reasonable number. About 500 of those protests came from Windsor. So your residents, about 500 people in Windsor came and visited with us or notified us in one way or the other. They could have talked to us online, through email, they can fax an appeal, they can talk to us in person, but we heard from about 500 of them. We had all of the month of May for people to protest their value, and then officially we get the month of June in order to make those decisions. But in order to get those mailed out to taxpayers by the last working day of June, we actually just finished all of our decisions and we'll be mailing them tomorrow. So it'll take about 1 to 2 days for most of the residents to receive their notices of determination. And so then all 5,700 people will get to see what that decision was. And then if they decide that they don't agree with the value, they can go ahead and appeal again. This time they can take it before the County Board of Equalization. In Weld County, the County Board of Commissioners actually sit as the County Board of Equalization. And so we'll expect to have probably another 400 appeals go before the County Board of Equalization in order to determine if the value we set is reasonable or if there still needs to be an additional adjustment to that value. The protest, it sounds a little overwhelming, 5,700 property owners talking to us during 1 month of May, but it's an amazing time for us to really get to know what's happening in communities, to understand a little bit more about taxpayers' properties, and we find it to be a really beneficial opportunity just to learn more information. Property owners always know more about their property than we do. We have a 4,000 square mile county, and we have 38 employees, and so you know your property much better than we do, and so we're always interested in hearing about that. Stacy asked that I give a little bit of an economic update in terms of what's going on in Windsor, and I think it's just impossible to not talk about property tax when we're talking about economics of any local government. It's such a key piece of the funding source. And just a little history on property tax. It was developed to be a stable funding source for schools and county government. As a matter of fact, in 1861, when Weld County became a county, one of the original 17 counties in Colorado, we had 2 mill levies. One was for the school, one was for the county. We had 195 parcels at that time. And so now if you move forward and you're looking at this booklet, you can see that we actually have at this time we had 176,506 parcels. We're a 4,000 square mile county, and you can see that our overall assessed value was $11.764 billion. So in 1862, we were at 154,000, and today we're at $11.64 billion. We have over 17 school districts now, mill levies ranging from 5 to 56. Those are all listed in this booklet. The county mill levy is 15.038, and overall we have over 400 taxing authorities in Weld County, which includes 31 cities and towns and 29 fire authorities. So with that value of $11.764 billion, we're actually the second highest valued county in the state. We're second only to Denver County. So we passed Jefferson and Arapahoe County a couple years ago, and if you ask why, you can answer that question by saying oil and gas, because we have such a significant increase in our oil and gas value. If you do look at the bottom graph on this booklet, you can see that over 40% of the value that we collect in Weld County supports the school districts. And all of that is local money, so it stays within the county boundaries. All of the money that we collect for those school districts goes back to those school districts. Because of oil and gas this year, we had 2 school districts that actually that exceeded their revenue for their state funding per pupil, their state per pupil funding. And so the revenue went back to the state, and the state redistributed that revenue back to other local school districts in Weld County. You can also see that about 21% of that value goes to Weld County, and about 5% goes to the cities and towns. So where does the value all come from? That's the top graph that you're looking at in that booklet. So where does value come from? Obviously, the lion's share of value in Weld County comes from oil and gas. 58% of the value last year came from oil and gas. And as I said, we just finished revaluing all property in Weld County. So we are right now in the protest period for oil and gas. And so I can't guarantee that these numbers are 100% accurate, because oil and gas can certainly still protest their value. But we were at 11.76 taxable for our $11.76 billion taxable for the county, and we're now at $14.9 billion. So we went up about $3 billion this year, and that's a combination of market value increases in commercial, residential, industrial, and it's also an increase from oil and gas. It puts Weld County's percentage of oil and gas at 68%. So we were at 58%, and we're now at 68% for the county's value being attributable to oil and gas. Wow, right? Yeah. So let's look a little bit at Windsor's value. That is the handout that I gave you that also has 2 graphs on the bottom of it. I again repeat that this is preliminary. We do not do our first official preliminary certification until August 25th, but since we've already valued oil and gas and all other real property, I don't think it's a risk to provide this to you, knowing that it could still change. So you can see the 2018 assessed value for all of your classes of property, and then you can see your 2019 preliminary assessed value. So if we look at the first 4 classes, vacant, residential, commercial, and industrial, when we value those properties, we are looking at market value for those. And market value can be measured a variety of ways. But really, we're saying, what does a property buy and sell for? That's really what market value is. And so when we look at the vacant land class, we can say that it went from 10 million up to 17 million. That's a 63% increase. Seems pretty steep for what a market value increase might be, but it's because it also includes any new vacant lots that were created as of January 1. And so not only is that 63% capturing a market value change, but it also captures all of that land that perhaps changed from agricultural land and is now vacant subdivision land, either in an industrial park or a commercial area, or perhaps a residential subdivision like Raindance or Water Valley, or any of your residential subdivisions. For residential, commercial, and industrial, we're required by the Tabor Amendment to value property using strictly the sales approach. All we can do in order to value residential property is look at sales. And so when we looked at sales in Windsor, we saw that, and keep in mind that when we revalue property, for real property, we're making a 2-year change in value. So we went from a date of June 30th, 2016, that was where we were measuring value, to a date of June 30th of 2018 to measure value. And so the first thing we did was we looked at sale prices of residential property. And in Windsor, the median sale price of a house in Windsor was $327,000 on June 30th of 2016. And on June 30th of 2018, the median sale price was $390,000. So that's about a 20% increase in value. So that's the first thing we do. Now we go through this very complex analysis of all of the sales that occur throughout the entire county. We break it down into smaller areas in order to figure out what all of those values are. But then we use that as a test when we come back and we say, okay, residential value in Windsor went up 23%. Does it make sense when we're looking at the sales of properties going up 20%? And to us, we go, of course it makes sense. Not only does that number capture that market change in value, but it's also capturing any new residences that were built in this area. So 23% seems really reasonable. For commercial and industrial, we also are looking, not only are we looking at sales, but we're also allowed to use 2 other approaches to value. So we're allowed to use the cost approach to value and the income approach to value. Cost approach is really that replacement cost new. What does it cost to build that property? And then the income approach to value looks at what the lease rates are of the building. We're not looking at the business income, but we're looking at how much does a tenant have to pay in order to lease that building. And what's the vacancy for those typical occupancies, and what are the typical expenses? So we look at sales for all of those properties, we look at income for all of those properties, we look at actual income. So if a business owner will provide us their actual income, meaning what they're leasing their building for, we'll look at that, and we'll look at typical income in order to determine value. And you can see in the commercial class, we had a very large increase in value, 43% increase in value. And that's because we were seeing such drastic increases in sale price and drastic increases in lease rates. The lease rates continue to skyrocket, particularly in this area. We're seeing it along the I-25 corridor and other areas of the county, especially like warehouse properties that are being influenced by oil and gas in particular. But we really saw strong increases in value along that I-25 corridor. For agricultural, you can see that value went down. That's because we're required to value it based on a 10-year production formula using commodity prices. Commodity prices went down during that time period, so agricultural value went down. Natural resources is just sand and gravel, basically, and so we value it based on its commodity price as well, the amount of production. But oil and gas in this area went up 54%. So oil and gas is valued based on its production and its net price. So we look at the sale price less expenses for oil and gas, the actual price that it takes to make it marketable, and then we multiply that by the production of the oil and gas. 54% increase really doesn't surprise me, and that's because we have so many horizontal wells going in. If you have any new horizontal wells that are going in your area, you're likely to see a 54% increase in value. Those wells those first 1 or 2 years, they just really produce. But what I would warn everybody is that you should not be thinking that that's going to be a continual amount of money that's going to be coming in. Because just like we see them go up really fast, they also drop off really fast. As a matter of fact, within the first 1 to 2 years, we see them drop about 50%. And so that amount of production drops drastically within the first 1 to 2 years, and then it'll drop again another 30% the next year or two, and then continue to go down. And so you have to be really careful about thinking that oil and gas is a continual revenue stream because it's such a volatile commodity. This, as we move forward, adding in the complexity of Senate Bill 181 and the fact that we might not have new drilling permits for a while, means that we might not get new wells. And so then in addition to your production going down, you might not get a new well to offset that. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at your overall budget.
So then how does that affect your numbers and like what goes in to fill that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question about what goes in to fill that gap. There really isn't anything that's going to go in to fill that gap. So unless you are able to raise your mill levy from a revenue side, then your overall value and your overall revenue will drop. Otherwise, if you raise your levy, then the existing taxpayers, all of those that are vacant, residential, commercial, industrial, they'll pay more in tax in order to make up any loss in oil and gas. Yeah.
You mentioned horizontal drilling. My understanding was that the value is at the wellhead.
Yes, the value is at the wellhead.
Right.
Yes.
So if the wellhead is outside of town limits, if it's in Weld County, that's not revenue for Windsor.
That's correct. So the law is specific about not only valuing it at the wellhead, but taxing it at the wellhead. And so we do both at that surface location because that's usually where services are provided.
Another question about that. Who determines what their production level is?
The production level is reported by the company. So every oil and gas company is required to report to us every single well and the production associated with that well that occurred in the prior year. So for 2019, we received production from all of 2018 on all of the wells in Weld County. We verify that data in two ways. One, we review the data from the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission. So we warn and tell all of those oil and gas companies that even though it's self-reported, we're going to verify it based on what they also report to the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission. The second step we do is we audit oil and gas companies. So we have an outside contractor that we've hired that goes in and randomly pulls the actual accounting schedules in order to verify that the oil and gas companies are telling us the truth, because it is all self-reported and it's so significant. So we cover it from both sides in order to try to ensure that the production is right and that net price is right. Because when our auditors review the production, they also review the expenses. Yeah.
How many different rates do you have? Residential is 7-point-something%, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Commercial is
29.
29?
Correct.
Industrial, same?
29, yes, those are actually on the back of your handout. But I have to say that I made a mistake and I didn't correct the residential rate. It just dropped from 7.2% to 7.15%, and I did not update your handout, so I apologize. It's on that one, it's not on this one. So, and I did it in all the examples, I just forgot to change it on the bottom. But the residential rate is 7.15%. That's part of the Gallagher Amendment. So the Gallagher Amendment measures the statewide assessed value, and it says that 55% of the value is going to sit in the all other category, and 45% of the value is going to sit in residential. The Gallagher Amendment states that commercial, industrial, and all other property are assessed at 29%. So what it does is it looks at the all other side and it says, what's the value of all of those times 29%? And that sets the target for the 45% side. And so because we continue to build more homes, and because the value of those homes keeps going up, that 45% piece of the pie keeps trying to get bigger and bigger. And so the only way to make it back to shrink it back so it's 45% is to lower the assessment rate. So it was reduced this year to 7.15% to offset and to make sure that that pie was 45% on the residential side, 55% on the all other side. But I think a key to that is that you have to remember on the all other side is oil and gas. And so oil and gas got really big this year and has a couple years in the past too. And so not only is the piece of the pie getting bigger, but the whole pie got bigger because oil and gas grew that side of the pie. And that actually kept the residential rate from dropping even more than it did. Because we had more value on the oil and gas side, it held the residential rate a little bit higher than it would have had we not had the oil and gas value.
So
I know it's sort of complicated.
So the counter, I mean, the opposite, of course, if you drop oil and gas revenues.
Right.
Gallagher likely will have an impact on residential.
And, you know, once if the Tabor Amendment stays in place the way it is, if that residential assessment rate drops, then it can never go back up without a vote. And so it would be just the opposite of that. So, but the Tabor Amendment is under review right now, so it's uncertain what that's going to look like by the time we get through another legislative session. So that might change. So,
Okay.
you good? Okay.
Please continue.
Yeah, so just another quick summary. So that puts your value at 431 million in 2018, but it takes you up to almost 574 million in 2019. That's a 33% increase. And like I said, this all still can change because we're still in the middle of protest for oil and gas. We were just talking today about the potential of a $10 million change. It's so interesting when we talk with residential, we're like, $20,000 change on actual value. But for oil and gas, we're usually talking $10 to $20 million change just because it's so significant. Let's see, I did provide one other graph that I just thought was interesting for you to review. You know, what we did was we said, well, what is the breakdown of your property in Windsor, showing that your 36% is residential, your 26% is oil and gas, but how do you compare to Severance or Greeley or School District 4 or Weld County? I mean, it's interesting to look and see where your allocation of property type is compared to Weld County, for example, which is 68% oil and gas. But one of the best things that I saw when I looked at this is that it's really important for a community to be diverse, and you have a really nice balance, a really nice diversity in Windsor, one that we don't always see. Oftentimes we see this Weld County diversity where it's really heavily weighted on oil and gas, and therefore if oil and gas has any impact to it, then it makes you more vulnerable. So I thought you might just be interested in seeing how you pair it up to other communities around you. Other than that, that was about all I had to say, unless you have further questions.
Okay. Any final questions
Comments?
or comments? Sure.
You're my hero.
Yeah.
I love this stuff.
Oh, I know.
Pictures, numbers, yeah.
I'm a big data nerd.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to
you.
present to us this evening. Ms.
Yes.
Miller, did you have anything further?
Nothing further.
Thank you for bringing our guests this evening.
That's all the same presentation.
Moving on to item D, communications from town attorney.
Nothing from me, Madam Mayor.
Communications from town staff. Mr. Balstead, anything further? Ms. Miller, anything further?
Nothing.
Mr. Lucas?
Oh,
20 minutes?
Start the clock.
Sure.
Start the clock.
I just wanted to thank you for coming to the groundbreaking and your continued support of that project and all the departments that we impacted. So looking forward to getting that construction project done. Wanted to remind you that Bike to Work Day is Wednesday. So Shane, I'll probably be late to every meeting because I'm going to bike to work and I'm pretty slow at it.
So what's the other 364 days when you're late?
Reminder of Community Cares Night is Thursday. I hope we have a great turnout. A lot of work's been done on staff's part, the mayor's part, and some of our community partners. And lastly, want to let you know that staff met today with Public Works, Police, Recreation Department on planning the 4th of July and the impact that will occur with the fireworks and just the overall use of the lake. So again, thank you for your support. Thanks.
Chief, did you want to do a little summer reminder about everybody, about how to be more cautious about making sure you lock doors and lock your car And
You didn't want to, but yeah.
I know you didn't
I think
want
you just
to.
did.
Just say what she said.
We'll make her a deputy, an interim deputy.
Well, summer begins for us. We have increases in criminal trespasses and burglaries and things of that nature, opportunity crimes. So we always want to remind people to lock your doors at home, lock your cars. If you leave valuables in your cars, hide them or remove them, put them in your trunk. It's not uncommon for people to see a purse or a phone or a briefcase in a car at a trailhead or the parking lot and knock the window open to get in. So secure those items, be safe. And as we approach 4th of July, we caution people, fireworks are not legal. If it blows up, leaves the ground, it's not permitted in Windsor, and the fine is $500. So.
Good reminder.
Thank you.
Thank you. Communications from town manager.
Yes, Mayor, I just want to make the board aware, staff has been monitoring the levels of the Poudre River. We did have, actually, Chief came in this weekend and did a little public service announcement. Just the levels had risen quite a bit. Today they had dropped back down, but we anticipate with the 90-degree weather this week that river's going to rise quickly. So we are going to try to get the word out, block off the areas, try to keep people out of the river. But just so the board knows, we're going to be working on that this week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Communications from town board. Any communications? Mr. Baker.
Yeah, thank you. We had that very eye-opening presentation earlier this evening about mental health and teen suicide, and I wanted to thank those gentlemen that came forward. At CML, I attended a Building Mentally Healthy Communities breakout, and I saw many of those same stats. But since June is Pride Month, I wanted to highlight some of the suicide stats associated with the LGBTQ community. 45% have considered suicide. 34 have made a suicide plan, and 20% made a suicide attempt. These are epidemic numbers. And I think we need to celebrate and support Windsor's LGBTQ teen and adults. That's it.
Okay. Anybody else? I just want to say we attended CML this week, and thank you to our citizens who allowed us to attend. I think it was very valuable. We came away with a lot of good information. One thing to note, a lot of the mountain towns have canceled their fireworks programs. Everybody believes that it's because of fire hazard. No, it's because Breckenridge specifically said they are getting tons of comments from their community that they are unhappy with all of the people that come in for all of their number of events. So they are really reconsidering what they are doing there, as well as other communities. So a different take, and something that I think we need to watch and be aware of, that as we build great programs, which we always do, we at the same time, though, some of our own sometimes feel like they can't be part of it because of what happens there. So that's that fine line we all have to walk. And with that, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. We have a first and a second. I think they're still in there.
If we can get a vote. Oh!
And we are adjourned.
Hey, Scott, do you have?